They say the wind tells secrets in the canyons if you listen close. And the tale of young Elsie Mae Callahan, that one rides the coldest gust every winter, curling like smoke around the eaves of Pine Hollow's aging buildings, rattling the loose panes of its empty rooms. It was the last week of November when the wind changed. Folks in Pine Hollow remembered it because the sky, which had been clear and brittle blue for days, turned the color of old pewter. A hush came over the land. Even the dogs stopped barking, the kind of stillness that makes a man hold his breath for no good reason. Elsie Mae was patching the north fence on her grandmother's ranch when she felt it, that sudden shift in the air. The horses raised their heads. Her mule, Biscuit, gave a low groan and wouldn't budge another step forward. She glanced toward the hills, where the gray shadows stretched long and sharp. Trouble, she thought. It's coming down from the high country. She wasn't one to scare easy. At 17, she'd buried both parents and learned to work land hard enough to break a man's back. Her mother had died coughing blood into a rag, and her father had vanished on a ride out past the Snake Ridge 6 winters back. Never found, just gone. She didn't wear grief like a badge. She wore it like worn leather, tight to the skin, built for use. She rode back into town with a coil of rope over her shoulder and a rifle strapped to Biscuit's side. The saloon was quieter than usual. Men nursed their drinks and avoided each other's eyes. The old piano sat silent, covered in dust. Outside, shutters flapped in the rising wind. From the corner of her eye, she saw them. 4 riders, coming down Main Street slow as molasses. Dust coiled around their horses, hooves like smoke. They weren't dressed like drifters. They looked like men with a purpose. At the head was a tall man with dark gloves and a coat too fine for a place like Pine Hollow. His face was handsome in a wolfish sort of way, sharp-jawed with gray at the temples. Though he couldn't have been more than 35, he rode with the confidence of someone used to having things handed to him, or taking them by force. Caleb Finch. Elsie had heard that name only once, years ago, when her father came home white-faced and shaking, whispering about men who'd rather kill than be questioned. Men who had stolen a Union payroll wagon and buried it in the hills. Her father said he'd seen the truth, and that truth got him killed, one way or another. Now the man responsible rode right into her town, like it was nothing. Caleb dismounted and tied his reins to the post outside the general store. His men fanned out, one by the stable, another near the blacksmith's. The fourth, a lanky, pale-eyed boy no older than 20, leaned against the water trough, picking his teeth with a knife. Caleb looked around like he was weighing every soul he saw and finding them wanting. "Afternoon," he said, voice as smooth as polished bone. "I'm looking for a girl. 17, rides a mule. Name's Elsie Mae Callahan." No one answered, not even the sheriff, who stood just outside the saloon door with a shotgun in one hand and fear in the other. The town had seen enough blood. It didn't want more. Elsie didn't run. She walked Biscuit down the alley between the saloon and the old mill house, dropped her gear, and slipped through the back of the butcher's shop. Her hands were steady. Her eyes weren't. She made it 2 blocks before they caught her. The pale-eyed boy grabbed her by the arm, yanking her back like a rag doll. She elbowed him in the ribs and tried to draw the knife from her boot, but another one, bigger, crueler, cracked her across the face with a pistol butt. Darkness didn't come all at once. It crept in like the wind, slow, bitter, and full of warning. When she came to, she was tied to the back of a horse. The hills rolled past in shades of ochre and stone. Snowflakes fell, light and whispering, though the sky above was still and wide. Caleb rode beside her, smiling without joy. "You know where it is," he said, as if they were sharing a private joke. "Your daddy must have told you. The wagon, the gold. I've spent 10 years looking. He took it to his grave, unless he passed it down." She stared at him, blood drying on her lip. "He didn't tell me anything." Caleb leaned in, close enough for her to see the black thread of a scar running from his jaw to his neck. "Then you'll remember it. Maybe not today, but you will. And when you do, I'll be there to listen." They kept riding into the hills, up where the pine gave way to snow and the sky turned sharp and mean. The mountains didn't care who lived or died. They just stood, ancient and watching. Back in Pine Hollow, the sheriff stood with his hat in hand, staring at the trail of hoof prints in the dust. He looked at the hills, then at the wind, then at nothing at all. A man beside him muttered, "Ain't no one gonna bring her back now." But the sheriff shook his head. "Don't be so sure," he said, voice low and reverent. "There's blood in them hills, and some debts never rest. If he's still out there, if he's alive, he'll come down like winter itself." And as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, the wind rose, cold, hungry, full of old promises. The storm set in with quiet purpose, blanketing the mountains in white until the trees lost their shape and the horizon disappeared. Snow whispered down through the pines, softening the world into silence. Up there in the high country, even time seemed to lose track of itself. The outlaws didn't belong to the cold. Their coats were too thin, their tempers too short. They grumbled about the trail, their horses, the food, the girl. But Caleb Finch pushed them on, higher into the hills, eyes sharp with hunger. Gold was close. He felt it, like heat behind a wall. Elsie rode slumped over the saddle, wrists raw from the rope, lips cracked from wind. She hadn't spoken since yesterday. Not to plead, not to beg. She listened. She listened to the crunch of snow under hooves, the labored breath of the horses, the snap of branches above. And now and then, once or twice a day, she heard something else. A branch breaking behind them that wasn't caused by a hoof. A bird scattering in the wrong direction. A scent, faint but familiar, riding the wind. Her uncle used to say the mountains had their own language. If you could quiet the fear in your gut, you might just learn a word or two. Caleb's gang made camp in the hollow of an old trapper's cabin, half collapsed and half frozen. The roof sagged under the weight of the snow. One of the horses had gone lame and was shot without ceremony. The men argued in low voices, circling like dogs. Elsie was tied to a post near the door, hands bound but eyes open. She watched the youngest of them, Silas, they called him, flip his knife in the firelight. He wasn't as loud as the others. His eyes darted more. He glanced at her when the others weren't looking, something like doubt flickering in his gaze. "You're not going to find anything," she said, just loud enough for him to hear. Silas froze for a second, then went back to his knife. "Your boss is chasing ghosts." "Your daddy hid something worth dying for," he muttered. "That don't sound like a ghost to me." Elsie smiled, though it hurt. "Then you better hope you're the one left alive to find it." The storm worsened by nightfall. Wind howled through the timbers, and the fire coughed low against the cold. One man stood watch while the others slept in shifts. Elsie didn't sleep. She waited, and in the middle of that blackest hour, something changed. A branch cracked just outside the circle of firelight. Not the wind, not snow. Something deliberate. The guard stood, rifle raised. "Who's out there?" No answer. He stepped outside, boot crunching the ice-crusted snow. A moment passed. 2. Then a sound, quick, sharp, and final. The fire flared. The horses screamed. One of them kicked free of its tether and bolted into the trees. The men scrambled awake, guns drawn, breath steaming in the cold. "He's gone," one shouted. "Pete's gone." "No tracks," another said wide-eyed. "Just blood, like he got snatched clean off the earth." Caleb didn't shout. He stood calm, pistol in hand, scanning the trees. "He's not gone," he said. "He's here." Elsie knew then it was true. Zeke Callahan was alive. They used to call him the Whisper on the Wind. War scout, sharpshooter, trap setter. After the war ended, after her father died, he vanished into the high country like smoke into clouds. Folks said he'd gone mad. Others said the world had, and he just left it behind. But Elsie had never forgotten him. He was the one who taught her to read animal tracks, to get a deer, to tell a bluff from a real threat. He taught her how to disappear. Now he was back. The next morning, the men searched the trees. No sign of Pete, but carved into a pine near the trail was a mark, a crude arrow with a circle around it. A scout sign. Meant you are being watched. Caleb stared at it for a long time, then turned to Elsie. "You know what this means." She looked him dead in the eye. "It means you should have stayed in town." By midday, Another man was gone. This time the body was found, neck snapped, face buried in snow. No footprints but his own. A knife left sticking from a nearby stump, handle wrapped in old cavalry leather. Silas began to crack. This ain't right. It's like he's a ghost. Caleb's voice dropped low, calm and dangerous. He's no ghost. He's Ezekiel Callahan. And if you want her back, he's gonna have to come get her. Elsie felt the fear coil in her belly then, not for herself, but for her uncle. She knew what Caleb was capable of. And she knew Zeke, older now, maybe slower, maybe tired, but still dangerous, still precise. She just didn't know how far he'd go to bring her home. That night, they set up tripwires, alarms, a ring of fire that popped and spat against the storm. Caleb made Elsie sit near the flames, out in the open like bait. "You want him," he said to the trees. "Come and get her." No answer. Not then. But just before dawn, as the sky turned steel gray and the fire burned low, Elsie felt something cold press against the ropes at her wrist. A knife. Silent and sure. She turned, and there he was. Snow in his beard, eyes like flint, wrapped in buckskin and shadow. He pressed a finger to his lips. Then he was gone again. Elsie's wrists were free. She looked down at the knife he left in her lap. It was her father's, the handle carved with a star and a line, a family mark. The storm had calmed, but something worse was coming. And this time, it had a name. Snow gave way to mud as they descended, the storm lifting like a curtain torn from the stage. The gang, now only 3, moved fast and nervously down the ridgeline. Caleb's jaw was tight, his eyes forward. He hadn't slept. Silas had stopped speaking altogether. The third, a squat man named Duffy, muttered to himself, glancing at the woods as though they whispered slurs behind his back. Elsie walked now, not bound but under constant watch. They thought her uncle was still up in the hills, circling. But Zeke had given her the knife for a reason, and it wasn't for carving meat. She kept it tucked in her boot, waiting. Caleb's arrogance began to fray as the land warmed. The snow retreated in patches, revealing rusted pine needles and damp moss. What once concealed now exposed. Tracks blood, pieces of the past scattered like bones across the forest floor. They crossed Wolf Creek by a broken log bridge. The water roared below, swollen from melt, but the far side was the beginning of old mining country, abandoned shafts and creaking timbers, where a man could vanish beneath the earth and never come back. It was there, in the shadow of a hollowed-out hillside, that Zeke finally stepped into the open. No more ghosts. No more whispers. Just a man in a tattered hat, rifle slung over one shoulder, and an iron stare that cut through the mist. Duffy raised his pistol. Zeke shot him through the chest, without blinking. Silas bolted, crashing into the underbrush, and was gone. Only Caleb remained. He didn't flinch. Instead, he clapped slowly, mockery thick in his voice. So the legend lives. I was beginning to wonder. Zeke said nothing. Elsie took a step toward her uncle, but Caleb grabbed her arm and hauled her in front of him, pistol to her head. "You take one more step," Caleb said, "and she dies before your boots touch the dirt." Zeke's expression didn't change. "You kill her, and you'll be dead before you hear the shot." Caleb laughed, and it was an ugly, broken sound. "You won't shoot me, old man. Not with her in the way. You're here because you couldn't protect your brother, couldn't protect your family. You think one more rescue makes up for that." Elsie didn't move. She could feel Caleb's breath on her neck. His hand on her shoulder trembled ever so slightly. He was bluffing. She knew it, and Zeke knew it too. "I ain't here to make up for anything," Zeke said. "I'm here to end it." With a flash, Elsie dropped, slamming her heel into Caleb's shin. He cried out, firing wild. The bullet struck a tree. Zeke moved in that same breath, one clean motion, and fired. Caleb fell backward, gun slipping from his fingers. He hit the ground hard, eyes wide. Elsie scrambled away as Zeke approached, slow and deliberate. "You ain't worth another bullet," Zeke muttered. "But I'll bury you, same as the others." "No, wait," Caleb gasped. "You don't know what he did. Your brother. He took it. The gold. Buried it somewhere in these hills. Left us to rot. I know, Zeke said. Caleb blinked. You what? Zeke knelt beside him, close enough that only Elsie heard the words. My brother did what you never had the guts to. He buried that blood money, so deep the devil himself couldn't find it. Then he told me, and only me, where it was. I ain't here to find it. I'm here to make sure you never do. Caleb's breath rattled once more and stopped. Zeke stood slowly, and for a moment, the woods were silent again. Elsie looked up at him, uncertain. She hadn't seen her uncle in nearly 10 years, and here he was, older, thinner, eyes darker, but still standing. He offered a hand. She took it. I figured you were dead, she said. I was, he replied. Then I heard you were in trouble. That woke me up some. Together, they began the slow walk back toward Pine Hollow. The ride was quiet, but not empty. They stopped once to bury Duffy in a shallow grave beside the creek, marking it with a stack of stones. They found Silas 2 days later, half-starved, shivering in a cave. He didn't resist when Zeke took his gun and told him to walk east and never come back. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the wind had shifted again, warmer now, carrying the scent of dust and horses and firewood. Pine Hollow hadn't changed. Still the same creaky saloon, same cracked bell over the chapel, same boarded-up windows on the mercantile. But when Elsie and Zeke rode in together, side by side, the townsfolk came out to see. The sheriff met them outside the old jailhouse, mouth open like he'd seen a ghost. Zeke Callahan, he breathed. I'll be damned. Not yet, Zeke replied, tying off his reins. But I hear you've been keeping my niece safe. The sheriff chuckled, rubbed the back of his neck. Truth be told, she's the one keeping us safe. Elsie slid down from her saddle, eyes scanning the faces around her. Some she knew, some she didn't, but they all watched her now with a mix of awe and gratitude. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired, aching, cold to her bones, but alive. And for now, that was enough. That night, as the town gathered in the saloon to drink and trade stories, Zeke sat near the fire, his hat tipped low, sipping something brown and warm. Elsie sat beside him, silent, her fingers tracing the edge of her father's knife. You gonna stay? She asked. Long enough, he said. For what? He stared into the flames. To make sure no one ever digs up what should stay buried, and to teach you what comes next. She smiled faintly. You mean how to disappear into the hills and haunt bad men till their teeth rattle? He grunted, among other things. Outside, the wind stirred the dust, lifting it in spirals under the moonlight. Somewhere in the dark, wolves howled low and long. Pine Hollow would never be the same, and neither would she. Come spring, the mountains thawed. Snow peeled back from the ridges like old skin, revealing the scars beneath, collapsed mines, bones of forgotten cattle, shattered glass where campfires once burned. High above Pine Hollow, the rivers ran fat and fast, carrying secrets toward the plains. Zeke Callahan was back among the living, but he moved like a man still half-shadow. He hunted game in the hills and walked the woods at twilight, whispering to the pines, reading signs in the mud like scripture. Folks in town called him the ghost with a rifle. They didn't bother him, and he didn't invite them close. But the girl did. Elsie stayed, refused offers from the circuit preacher to move east, turned down the rancher who wanted to marry her out of gratitude, and ignored the banker who tried to buy the land her father died for. She had a cabin now, small, tucked just past the edge of town, and she fixed it with her own hands. She kept her father's knife above the door. Sometimes she sat on the porch and watched the trail from the mountains, waiting for the wind to shift. Sometimes Zeke came down, quiet as snow, and brought her venison or stories carved from memory. Other times, he didn't come at all. That was fine, too. She didn't need saving anymore. One evening, as orange light pooled along the canyon walls, a stranger rode into Pine Hollow. Tall, slender, coat dusted with red earth, eyes sharp as flint, and lips curled in a grin too familiar to be friendly. He asked for whiskey first, and information second. Looking for the girl, he said, sipping slow. The one the Finch gang couldn't keep hold of. Rumor is she's worth something. The saloon went quiet. The stranger didn't notice, or didn't care. Also heard she's got herself a ghost for a watchdog, a relic from the war. The bartender poured another shot without asking and muttered, "You might want to ride out before sunset, stranger." "I might," he said, "but I won't." When word reached Elsie, she didn't flinch. She tied back her hair, laced her boots tight, and rode into town with her rifle strapped across her back. The stranger was waiting in the center of the main road, horse tied nearby, coat flapping in the breeze. "You her," he called out. "You the girl who walked out of a gang camp with a killer at her side?" "I'm the one who walked out alive," she said. "That enough for you?" He smiled. "Depends. I got reasons to think you're standing on something that belongs to my people." "No one owns this land," she said. "But if you want to test the soil, I've got 6 rounds in the rifle and 1 more in my boot." The wind hushed. Even the horses stood still. The stranger took 1 step forward, and then a crack echoed through the dusk. Not hers. His hat flew off his head. A bullet hole burned clean through the brim. Behind him, Zeke stood atop the old mercantile roof, rifle lowered, eyes hard. "That was a warning," Zeke said. "You won't get another." The stranger stiffened, glanced back, then laughed. "I thought you were a ghost." "Sometimes I am." "You aiming to die for her?" Zeke answered. "Already did. Didn't take." The stranger considered that. He looked from Zeke to Elsie, then at the gathered townsfolk lining porches and doorways, silent, waiting. He nodded slow. Then he walked to his horse, mounted, and rode out without another word. No one followed. That night, under stars sharp as cut glass, Elsie stood on her porch cleaning her rifle. Zeke sat in the dark by her steps, whittling something unseen. Neither spoke for a long while. "You didn't have to show up," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I'm glad you did." He paused, knife still in hand. "You don't need me anymore, Elsie. You've got the fire now. Same one your father had. Maybe more." She looked down at him, smile flickering like lantern light. "Maybe. But ghosts stick around for a reason." Zeke nodded, gazed distant. "They do." The next morning, he was gone. Left no trail, no goodbye. Just a small carving he'd whittled, a hawk, wings stretched wide, talons out. It sat on her windowsill, facing the hills. Elsie never spoke of where he went. Some said he returned to the war inside his head. Others claimed they saw him farther west, walking the edge of a new frontier. But folks in Pine Hollow remembered the tale, passed it down in low voices by firelight, of the girl who outlived the gang that stole her, of the man who came down from the snow like vengeance wrapped in buckskin, of the day the wind changed and justice followed. That's the story, at least, the way I tell it.